we're going to do a show today kind of talking about some late round values. I think that there are a lot of people, definitely you and I are very invested in this round. We spent maybe more time on this round even than round one. I think there are some, I won't say egregious, but there are some very intriguing values in this round where I think perhaps there's some anchoring to some other elements. And as a result, you can get some guys a little bit cheaper maybe than where they should go. And so we'll be trying to help people find some of those values late in their drafts. I wrote an article earlier this week talking about what you can do if you've actually traded out of all of your high round or high leverage picks, and you can get back and get the rookie discount versions of those guys. Now, the discount versions of those guys aren't going to hit as often, but if you pick the right players, you will occasionally get your Stephon Diggs and your Robbie Anderson and your Elijah Mitchell. And, we can go on and on with the different examples of that. They're rare, but they're important. And so, and then even in the third round, we've got some guys here who were drafted, Ben, on day 2. And so that part of it, you're still thinking their team is going to give them some work. You'll be able to get back out of that pick at some point, probably with not a lot of loss, even if the player doesn't do much, and a huge gain if the player does do something. So the pick of the 304 was Keontae Ingram. That one is a little bit of a reach by ADP, and it's probably one that we are not on because we're Benjamin fans. But you can see a very easy scenario in which Connor goes down, Ingram steps in, and he scores a lot of points. So even though it's an ADP reach, you can definitely understand the contingency-based reason for making that pick. And then we were up next, and we may or may not have drafted someone that we talk about a lot and talked about for 10 minutes at the end of the previous show.
But we were looking at Sam Howell, who we've talked about plenty of times on the show, and a couple of running backs, and we wound up moving up. So we had 2 picks in a row, then didn't have a pick, and then another pick. We wound up moving up one spot to get 3 in a row to be able to take all 3 of these guys because we couldn't really decide between the 3. But we took Howell, who, as we talked with the cut downs in this league, may not even make our roster, might be the least likely to make our roster, but we wanted to at least get a chance to see how he looks in the preseason. And we took Tyrion Davis-Price, who's sort of the bigger back mold, has this size-speed combo. San Fran took him in round 3, another day 2 pick at running back. Probably not a direct threat to Elijah Mitchell's work. I think the way that we're kind of thinking about it is they've talked about not wanting to use Deebo Samuel as much as a runner, or Deebo Samuel doesn't want to be used as much as a runner. It was really interesting that the day after the draft, he refollowed San Francisco on social media, the big, marker of our time of whether the player is happy with his team or not. Maybe that was something that they told him, hey, look, we got this back that's going to solve that problem for us because we don't really like Trey Sermon. But he has a really nice size speed profile and could potentially be their, big back, if you will. They're inside the tackle back where Elijah Mitchell's more of the, outside zone runner. And then we also got Kenneth Gainwell. We also broke into the veteran market. We were the first ones to take a veteran in this draft, which you can do in this rookie draft. We didn't really want to let Gainwell slip or risk that he might make it another couple of picks, and he's somebody that we're still very high on.
He is, and so this was an interesting section. You mentioned that Jalen Tolbert went there as well. He's someone that we have much higher than this spot in the RotoViz rookie guide. Very strong numbers in 2020 and 2021. There with South Alabama, has comps to Michael Gallup, could easily go in and kind of be in that role before Gallup is healthy this season. If there's any type of delay there, he should be going up ahead of a couple of the earlier guys. So when you can get him in this range, that's a very, very good pick. He's someone you should be trading in to at least consider. He wasn't one of our targets because we had already taken so many wide receivers. And so we're pivoting back to some different positions. Quarterback is a weakness for us in that we only have 2. We have 2 guys we really like in Murray and Derek Carr, but injuries can come into play. It's nice to have that third quarterback for the bye weeks. Now, if your team is strong enough overall, you can come through there, but we talk a lot about the key in Dynasty and what you're trying to do, you can't necessarily control the playoff scoring, but over the course of the season, you need to get as many buys as you possibly can. If you're going to take 2 weeks out of the season where you're only playing one QB, then that potentially can hurt you in terms of getting the buy. So if we can get stronger at that spot, we would like to do it. Tyrion Davis-Price, Ben, this one is interesting to me because you pull up the RotoViz Triflex ADP on our Dynasty tool on the site. One of the things that I like to do, you can go through there, you can see earliest drafted, you can see latest drafted, you can see average. I like to pull up the draft grid because visualizing where these players are going, I think really helps you internalize or conceptualize sort of how these players are coming off of the board. And this, I think, is the tension between how much credit should we give to what we felt like the player was coming in and how much should we give to the draft slot and what that tells us about opportunity. And then especially if there actually is opportunity with the team that drafted him. He's going at the 306 on average. That's after Zamir White at the 210, Algier at the 212, Brian Robinson at the 302. Those are interesting names because Algier has the clear opportunity. He seems like the guy who should be going more up in the Damian Pierce kind of range. And just to give that range too, the beginning of round 2 is 203 Rashad White, 204 Isaiah Spiller. He was someone we tried to get and failed. Damian Pierce to 205. Algier seems like he might be in that group. And then Davis-Price seems like a player who at the very least should be in the White Robinson group when you consider really how bad the landing spots are for those guys. Now, you mentioned the size speed element for Davis-Price, and obviously he goes to this team where we've seen them make use of this. I think that most NFL scouts and fantasy managers are concerned by the fact that he was not a particularly good player in college, doesn't have much of a receiving background, did rush for 1,000 yards in his final season at LSU, but every single season, his yards per carry average was below 5. We know it's a red flag when the running backs cannot put up impressive efficiency numbers in college. So there's another signal pointing the opposite direction from his timed speed with the size. How should we be looking at this? He was definitely a target for us. We think he should be higher. Do you have White and Robinson as guys, considering where they landed, that would be even in the same group with him, or is he your only target in that range?
I don't really love the landing spot for either. Robinson, they're already talking about potentially being in this 1-2 punch with Antonio Gibson, but Gibson is there and J.D. McKissick's there. So even if Gibson gets hurt and Robinson plays, that ceiling seems to be somewhat capped. So you're needing an injury and then not necessarily having substantial upside. Because he could also just not be very good. We need to be sure that he's good as well, right? And then you have Zamir White going to a roster that the Raiders are low-key really deep, and you have at running back, and you have Josh McDaniels taking over, and it feels a little bit like the Patriots vibe where Josh Jacobs is going really late and he's potentially a value. We took him last night on ship chasing, and we were talking about him a little bit. One of the appeals to Josh Jacobs over the last few years has been that he has such a strong hold on the early down work. And then last year, we see him finish, I think it was 5th among all running backs in receptions. We see the receiving work accelerate as well, which was just fantastic for him, and people are still not buying. And so you can certainly see an argument for him. My concern with the Zamir White pick, with Kenyon Drake still being on the roster, and with the Raiders bringing over Brandon Bolden, which, Brandon Bolden's always been kind of a key special teamser, but the Patriots did rely on him to fill the James White role pretty much all last year after James White got hurt, and now McDaniels bringing him over concerns me a little bit that might just be the guy that he trusts to play that role and catch passes. And then whatever Kenyon Drake is, but then also adding Zamir White, you have these multiple backs that mix in for early down touches, and Bolden might mix in for this pass catching role. It's just a big logjam. We've seen running backs emerge with the Patriots in the sense that, taking cheap shots on different Patriot running backs can make sense, but at this price, if we're saying it's that type of a situation and Zamir White could emerge, but it would need a little bit of shuffling, I just don't want to pay that price necessarily. And it is tough to see a scenario where he's getting a lot of work early in his career and is somebody that you're keeping on your roster in this type of format over multiple years, because at the absolute best, you still have Josh Jacobs, there. And then if Jacobs does get hurt or whatever, you have Kenyon Drake there. And so there's a big group. I think you put it right. Davis-Price would be the guy that I'm targeting more because that early opportunity. Keontae Ingram, same deal. You mentioned it, but we don't even know if he's the handcuff or the backup. He was a late rookie, a late draft pick. And we knew the Cardinals were going to just kind of add more bodies at running back. It doesn't really move the needle. It's one of those things where from a fantasy perspective, it's like, oh, well, the backup job is open for James Conner. That's really interesting, but we have no indication that he's better than Benjamin. And clearly, you and I think that's not going to be the case. So those are guys that it's really sort of tough for me to see the path. I mean, the capital was there more for Robinson and White, but don't love the offenses. Don't even love necessarily the, big picture ceiling if they did get a big opportunity. Because are these offenses going to score enough touchdowns for these guys to be in contention for multiple touchdown games? Those types of scenarios are harder to envision. It takes injuries, and then still I don't feel comfortable with what I would believe I have in those players. For Tyrion Davis-Price, I mean, the narrative or the logic behind the pick is a lot easier. So I think I would describe it as you did, where he'd be kind of the only target. He's got the size, speed. He's got competition, but the 49ers basically told us they don't like Trey Sermon, and then they went and drafted Tyrion Davis-Price in the third round the next year. So not that hard to envision a scenario where he's ahead of Sermon for that bigger back role. They don't want to use Debo in that role anymore. And so then he's an Elijah Mitchell injury away from potentially being the every down back, because he does have enough speed at his size to potentially also be their best option as that outside zone big play type runner, that Mostert, Elijah Mitchell role. If Mitchell goes down, I don't know who that next guy is. Mostert's not on the roster anymore. So there's definitely scenarios for Tyrion Davis-Price where you're like, okay, he's one of the main backs in a really lucrative rushing attack. So yeah, I mean, comparing him to those guys that went ahead of him, I think it's easy to say that Davis-Price is a better target, or for me, a more favorable target.
And one of the things that has been a justification for the draft pick is that as the 49ers continue to mix in some other run concepts into their offense as well, that they think that he can do some of those elements perhaps better than the other running backs on the roster. That part of it is interesting. You mentioned the situation is better. The 49ers backfield is both good and bad from a future trade perspective, because one of the reasons that we're targeting him, and one of the main considerations when you have roster spot crunch and or just as you're taking some of these picks that you expect not to be as valuable overall, is you're only looking at players where if something good happens for them, they're going to really spike in value. The 49ers backs probably are never going to have the type of value that consolidates at a really high level, because we know that what happened here to Elijah Mitchell can happen to the next guy. I mean, if Tyrion Davis-Price is the next guy, there will still be someone behind him. And so you're not going to get this home run trade for him at any point, even if he ends up being very good. But you have the potential to score, and you have the potential to get back out at a profit, because it's very easy for other managers to see the scenario where those points could be on their roster at the point where they needed it. So that part is nice. And I think that that's why we were targeting there. That's why we have him a little bit higher in terms of where we think that he should go. It'll be also interesting, and I'll ask you in a minute about Pierre Strong and Hassan Haskins. Those guys are going later, and I think also have a better argument, or at least a similar argument to Zamir White and Brian Robinson. So when we look at this idea of where are your picks, how can you get exactly the same value at a full round discount, they might be some options. But Ben, the next player that we selected, as you mentioned, was Kenneth Gainwell. He's an interesting guy, right? And so if you're not that interested in our deep rookie picks, there are some players here who are still very relevant in other formats as well. And so we actually made another trade. We didn't have 3 picks in a row, but we had the pick after this. We didn't want to risk losing him there. We really had him as the top guy on our board for a while, but because of rookie enthusiasm, which we also share, we're not trying to claim that we're immune to that, but because of rookie enthusiasm, we thought that he probably would be the guy who lasted, and so we risked that. He did last. We traded a future third for a future fourth and fifth to move up that slot. Now, that third round pick again is likely to be more valuable. At the same time, we just mentioned some running backs that we think have the same value in the fourth round as guys going in the third round. It picks up the extra fifth round pick. That fifth round pick in the future, you're thinking, okay, well, that pick probably isn't that valuable. And at the same time, that pick can be used to move up a pick or two when you feel like you desperately need to. So again, it gives you that flexibility to make future trades. It can seem like this is too many picks. You can't use them, but that flexibility is huge. And right here, it allows us to get into Kenneth Gainwell. We don't know whether or not we would have needed to make that pick, to make that trade to get Gainwell. The guy who went right after us was Justin Ross, who is going in that spot. But that's a weird one because despite our just unbridled and completely irrational enthusiasm, that actually seems a little bit high to us. But before we get to Ross, Gainwell, right? Here's a back who, in an offense that looks like it's going to be very explosive next season, and at the same time might still run through the running backs more than we want it to, he leads the Eagles' backs in yards per route. He was the only one of their backs with meaningful air yards. I know that you like both of those elements. He had the best broken tackle percentage of the group, and his 21% evasion rate. And these are numbers that you can find both in the Stealing Signals and in the Advanced Stat Explorer, so the different ones for different nuance with these stats, but 21% evasion rate was just below Javonte Williams last year, who gets, the enthusiasm with Williams is that he was just extraordinary when the Broncos let him have the ball, and that all their offensive line didn't give him a lot of great chances. And so almost all of his work was done after contact. Now, it's apples and oranges because Gainwell didn't have to maintain that lofty evasion rate through nearly as many touches. But the thing here is this is a guy who came in as a very interesting prospect, was good at Memphis, arguably much better than Antonio Gibson with some of the overlap that they had, and then comes back and had what I would consider to be a stealthily fantastic rookie year. One of these guys who could take a big jump in year two.
Yeah, we were just joking before the show about this concept of, if this guy was in the class, where would he go? I mean, we're kind of, I guess, building off of Pete Carroll's comments that Drew Lock would have been the first quarterback, but Gainwell would have been the third running back in this class, right? I mean, pretty easily. He had a really impressive profile. It was a surprise that he fell to round 5 last year in a better running back class. He still should have been a day 2 pick for most people. When you look at the profile and the receiving work he had in college and all the different elements, and then you look at how he was used last year, as you said, especially when they were throwing a little bit more early in the year, he was catching passes. He essentially got usurped by Boston Scott for a stretch, and into the late part of the year wasn't playing a ton. But then he got the start in week 18. The Eagles played Dallas. Neither team needed to play much, and he was good in that game. Ran effectively, got 12 carries, ran for 78 yards and a touchdown. That was one off his season high in carries. And then when they went into the postseason, they played him a little bit more than they had been late in the season. He had 5 catches for 49 yards and a touchdown against Tampa in that game. And then you go into his offseason, and the Eagles didn't really add anyone. They got UDFA Kennedy Brooks. They still have Boston Scott and Jason Huntley. I can't recall for how much time Jordan Howard was on the roster last year. He's been on and off the Eagles roster so much over the last few years, but he's not there anymore. They might still add someone else, but it looks like it's Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell right now going into next year, and that maybe the Eagles are coming around to the idea, especially if you look at their offseason moves, the fact that they didn't even bring in any of these really cheap, low-cost running backs to this point, and they might still, but to this point at least tells us something, that they might be comfortable with what they have. And that includes Boston Scott still, but Gainwell is a much more exciting player. It's an easy bet to make on year 2 that he continues to establish himself because he played well, as you said, in his rookie year. We got in his small sample positive elements that teams are looking at as well. He didn't have the draft capital last year. He wasn't going to be guaranteed anything. He played well early, but obviously was making some type of mistakes. Who knows? It's usually pass blocking or something, some type of mental mistake that costs these rookies playing time. But I mean, we see that with any rookie, right? We saw it with Jonathan Taylor. I always go back to this in his rookie season where he had that 3-game stretch. He barely touched the ball. He was playing a lot really early when Marlon Mack got hurt. Then he has this stretch. Then he comes back and has a great late part of the season. In his rookie year, Gainwell had sort of a more of a 5th round running backs version of that, right? Where he started hot, was playing a lot, and then the team kind of went away from him for whatever reason, but then closed with those couple games late where he showed something, and that usage in the playoff game, I think, is really notable. And then the lack of moves, like I said. So you're going into this year with this good profile. Maybe now that bumpy rookie year did more to establish him than his 5th round draft capital gave him any reason to be established going into year one. And now we have this guy with a really good prospect profile that, I mean, frankly, I think we would have probably in a perfectly equitable room where we were, not playing things a little bit and seeing how long the veterans might last. I would have been comfortable taking Gainwell almost like a full round earlier before some of these other running backs. Maybe not over some of the receivers that we actually took, but a guy who feels like a really nice piece to add to our running back group that needs upside pieces, and there's not a ton in this rookie class, so it was a fun way to get exposure to another young player. Very similar argument to a lot of the rookies, but we get sort of that post-hype, after year one discount, even though there shouldn't be any discount on Gainwell, as we're saying. Like, he's actually probably in a better spot this offseason than he was last year.
Yeah, I like him a lot there. We also selected him in our rookies and sophomores draft. So